morning, everyone. I think we'll get started. We all ready? Thank you. I'd like to start today's meeting by congratulating Cynthia Brand on her new appointment as the DOC Commissioner. As we begin today's meeting, I'd like to invite Commissioner Brand to open the meeting with some remarks regarding her transition, her vision, and this next phase for the Department of Correction. Commissioner, good morning.
Good morning. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the board for allowing me to make an opening statement. It is my honor to serve as the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Correction, and I recognize with that honor comes great responsibility. I take seriously my responsibility to ensure the safety of every member of the staff, our volunteers, the visitors who come through our doors, and those who are in our custody. I take seriously the laws of New York as well as the rules, standards, and stipulations set forth by the Board of Correction, the State Commission on Correction, the federal court, and its assigned monitors. And I take seriously our agency's role in ensuring public safety in this city every single day. I have confidence in my leadership team and the thousands of men and women who boldly come to work every day to do a job that most would not and very few understand. I will support them by providing them with relevant, quality training, necessary tools, and effective leadership at all levels. We will hold ourselves accountable and each other accountable for carrying out our mission with pride, integrity, and professionalism. As I have previously stated, my goal is to build upon the solid foundation of reform that was started 3 years ago, to be compliant with all rules and standards, and have the agency released from the oversight of the federal monitor. When that occurs, it will be a testament to all we have accomplished and proof that good correctional practices are embedded in our work. I understand we aren't there yet, and there is much work to do before we meet the high standards that we and others have set for ourselves. We have made mistakes, and we have missed deadlines, and despite our good intentions and best efforts, we may do so again in the future. Because there is no perfection in life or in corrections, but we strive for excellence every day. I am convinced that everyone here has the same goal of safe jails. I believe the lack of confidence in the agency and the atmosphere of mistrust must change if we are to move forward together to achieve that goal. While I fully expect the board and our justice stakeholders to hold us accountable, I ask that it be done in the spirit of partnership, not as adversaries. We can no longer afford to get mired in our own positions or point of view, taking hard stances against one another in an effort to prove that our perspective is the best or the only perspective. There's enough discord and hostility in the world, and we should challenge ourselves to rise above and not add to it by being unprofessional or disrespectful to each other, especially in a public forum. As partners, we can agree to advance our mutual interests through collaboration and compromise rather than by creating division and separation. We must listen with an open mind, seek to understand, and acknowledge that our collective sense of urgency is at times frustrated by a realization that sustainable culture and practice change takes time. To that end, I guarantee that we will be a more transparent agency that consistently and openly communicates with members of the board. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak this morning, and we look forward to working with you all.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I think I speak for the whole board when I say that we stand ready to work with you and your team to move forward. So we appreciate your remarks. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the September 2017 minutes. Will someone propose those? Is there a second?
I can find it in the minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a correction to the minutes.
Yeah, I just need a second first, then. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, then go ahead, Dr. Cohen.
Yeah, in the minutes of the last meeting, it states that, that a man, John Doe, who was housed in extreme isolation status by the department on order of a judge in the Bronx courts, was only paged 2 times. According to our reports, he was paged 3 times at least prior to the last meeting. I don't know if he's been paged again since then. I hope not. Has he? No further paging of the court. So it was, but to correct the record, to say it was 3 times, not twice.
Okay. I assume no one objects to that correction? So all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. The minutes are approved, subject to Dr. Cohen's correction. The next item on the agenda is the sexual abuse and sexual harassment variance request. The department has withdrawn the variance request in view of the fact that upon a review of the board, it was determined that there was not support for the variance request as proposed, so it has been withdrawn. We have 4 people scheduled for public comment on the variance. So, the first one, unfortunately, I can't read.
Al Craig.
Oh.
Or AC, or I think it's Al.
Oh, sorry, Al Craig. You pass? Okay, then the second is Clara O'Brien. You pass? Lizzie Wolgen? Pass, all right. Kelsey Diavola? Pass? Okay, thank you. All right, that's it. So I think Dr. Cohen is proposed to present a motion.
Yes, I'd like to propose a motion that the board of correction initially notice a violation from the Department of Correction regarding their failure to implement screening for free. That was the basis of the department's variance request, and again, more time for us to say it's okay for them to not accomplish this and to ask for more time. They obviously need more time since they haven't done it, but I think the board, I know that the board feels very strongly about this issue, the importance of maintaining safe jails for those at risk for sexual abuse and separating people from sexual predators, and that process should be should have been implemented already, should have been implemented in January, and we want to put the department on notice that they really have to get this done, and we want to get ready to report on it, and a corrective action plan within 2 weeks telling us how they're going to achieve it, and then regular reporting thereafter on what efforts they have made, who they have trained, and who they have identified for this process. So, should I just read the whole
I think you
thing?
should, Dr. Cohen.
Wherefore, the New York City Department of Correction has failed to comply and continues to be non-compliant with Board of Correction minimum standards 517 and 518, requiring, among other things, that the department, 1, assess all persons in custody during an intake screening and upon transfer to another facility for their risk of being sexually abused by other persons in custody or sexually abusive towards other incarcerated persons within a set period of time not to exceed 30 days from the incarcerated person's arrival at the facility, reassessing the person's risk of victimization or abusiveness based upon any additional relevant information received by the department since the intake screening, and 3, using information from such risk screening to inform housing, bed, work, education, and program assignments with the goal of keeping separate from persons at high risk of being sexually victimized those at high risk of of being sexually abused. Wherefore, the assessment of risk, as required by minimum standard 517, and the use of such assessments to protect people who the department has identified at high risk of being sexually victimized, as required by minimum standard 518, are a critical component of preventing sexual violence in the city's jails and a critical underpinning of the minimum standards regarding elimination of sexual abuse and sexual harassment in correctional facilities. Therefore, be it resolved that the department is in violation of minimum standards 517 and 518, and be it further resolved that the department shall take the following remedial action to cure this violation. 1. By October 24th, the department shall submit to the board in writing a corrective action plan detailing how it intends to comply with minimum standards 517 and 518 until it develops and implements an electronic screening tool to conduct the required assessments and make housing assignments and other determinations based on such assessment. 2. The department shall provide a written report to the board commencing October 16th, 2017, and every month thereafter, stating in detail what progress has been made toward development and implementation of an electronic screening tool, including, but not limited to, A, an updated timeline for implementation, B, the number of staff trained and the number of staff remaining to be trained on utilizing the tool, and C, other information the board determines should be included in the report. And the department shall comply, 3, the department shall comply with minimum standard 518, including notifying the board in writing of each placement of a transgender or intersex person, all information considered in making such determination, and the reasons for such determination. The department shall provide such information to the board commencing on November 1st, 2017 for the previous 2-week period, i.e. October 15th to October 29th, 2017, and within 2 business days following the end of each 2-week period thereafter. The department shall maintain a database of all transgender, gender nonconforming, and intersex people admitted to the city's jail system that enable the tracking of their path through intake to housing, their housing changes, relevant incidents in which they are involved. 5, by October 24th, the department shall provide the board with the following information: material used to train officers assigned to the transgender housing unit, the number of officers currently assigned to the transgender housing unit who have received such training, the number of the officers currently assigned to the transgender housing unit who have steady posts. In addition, starting the week of October 23rd, 2017, the department shall schedule weekly inmate council meetings and to provide the board with 24 hours notice of such weekly dates and times. That's the resolution.
Any comment, questions from board members? No?
I so move.
First, I also want to say congratulations to our new commissioner, and I really, really look forward to working with you, and I really appreciate your comment about open transparency, and I'm sure you have will work to try to resolve a lot of the problems we've seen. But I just wanted to say a couple of things. I know in the 4 years I've been on the board, FREA has been federal law, our federal state. We did take our time to make sure we got this right and created a new chapter incorporating and adopting standards that were cited, the exact same standards that the department is already bound by. And I know Moss Consultants worked with the department a few years ago and indicated that this was something necessary to be done. So they're already bound by this federal standards. It's really about the only way that we can ensure that incarcerated persons will be protected as best we can from sexual violence. And even considering a waiver, these are, it would essentially be granting them sort of a waiver on complying with federal standards, which is not appropriate for us to consider. So I'm very hopeful that our new commissioner is going to take this very seriously and try to get this electronic system up and running so we can comply with these standards. And so I think the resolution.
Thanks. I think we'll take a roll call vote now. Reagan. Richards.
Yes.
Judge Hamel?
Yes.
Dr. Cohen?
Yes.
Ms. Jones-Austin? Yeah. I vote in favor, so Motion carries. Thank you.
I apologize. Could you clarify? We weren't prepared to present. Could you clarify what you're looking for exactly? We apologize. I think we had some miscommunication on that. We would. Apologies.
Additional time granted. Jeff, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. We certainly appreciate the board's assessment.
Jeff, just before.
Yeah.
And I also, and mirror others. You also spoke about your, people.
Of course. And thank you. In that vein, we certainly appreciate the board's assessment of ESH as well, both for the adults and the young adults, for their difficult but helpful consideration of the need for these units. As you all know, ESH was developed to provide the department with more options in managing our most persistently violent population. It certainly is an idea that has developed over time. We've modified as circumstances have changed. ESH is a leveled management housing unit option that has helped the department build a continuum of management options, which is a stated requirement of the Nunez consent judgment, but also just good national correctional practice. And it is a goal of ours. Previously, before this administration started, the only housing options truly available to the department were essentially GP and punitive segregation. And it's easy to then understand that before ESH, there was an over-reliance on punitive segregation with over 600 people in punitive seg and a wait list of over 1,200. Not solely because of ESH, but through a combination of steps, including higher staffing ratios, better training, more tools, but also management options like ESH. We have been able to drastically minimize the use of punitive segregation, making it hopefully more effective, more immediate, and thanks to that implementation, only 102 people are currently today in punitive segregation for their infractions. Furthermore, as was stated, 107 people were placed in ESH, all with 7, 10, or 14 hours out of cell, far more than allowed in punitive segregation. And that number only represents about 1 to 1.4% of our overall population. That's an over 88% reduction in our punitive seg use, and only 2.9% of our population, 265 out of somewhere around 9,200, are in any form of restrictive housing, which is still far less than we began with when this administration started. So we thank the board for working with us on that, because the establishment of ESH has given us the options to move away from just a one-size-fits-all. It allows us to treat people and follow through with the goals of the department, which is to move away from the one size, to engage with the inmates, to give the officers more tools and options so they can handle people who don't necessarily need just the most restrictive housing available. So, well, I will say that while incidents within ESH remain relatively high per capita, which is something that is noted within the report and something we see ourselves, it is important to remember that the population within those housing units are placed in there because of their violent histories and the actions that immediately push them in. What I can also say, however, is that because of that, the department has generally been able to address the most violent and separate them from the larger general population. Over this time, we can say also since the beginning of FY14 that uses of force with any injury have declined by 12%. Those that have resulted in the most serious injuries are down 53%. Serious inmates to injuries because of fights are down 13% from that FY14 time, and assaults on staff with any injury are down 19%. Those with serious injuries, the A-class injuries, are down 65%. While that, again, is not solely because of ESH, ESH has been able to provide us the options that allow us to move towards those numbers, which are all positive trends for us as a department to try to lower the violence. Our first priority was to make sure that people are safely treated, staff feel safe when they're on post, and the lowering of any of the incidents that result in actual injuries is a key indicator to that point. Now, on to some of the specific recommendations. We do appreciate a lot of the recommendations. First and foremost, we do agree that we need to move forward with rulemaking. We look forward to the longer discussions about that. We do request and note that we need to make sure that the rulemaking for ESH also allows for some flexibility, because as we have noted, we have moved and been flexible with our transformation of ESH, increasing the levels, making sure we have better incentive systems. We're building better programming. Now that we have moved towards achieving 100% offering of 5 hours of programming to all the general population, we now have in place more programming staff and contracted program providers to provide the programming in ESH and in other units that were lacking previously. We had difficult times putting people in there, and we had difficult times kind of scheduling the programming. Key effort for ESH has been on creating a master schedule that deconflicts things and offers the programming. Some of the key efforts on that is the ability to bring in the programming staff and the contracting staff to kind of provide the programming. In general, beyond the programming recommendations, we take seriously the procedural justice. This is something we are currently working on. I think as we said in the last vote on ESH, and young adults specifically in ESH, we are looking, one, to make sure that we do have dedicated programming staff as a part of the assessment teams for ESH. Now that we do have the staff in place, we'll be able to do that better. Two, we do note that after a while, if people don't show the requisite movement up levels, it may require a higher level of review. So if a person after 2 45-day reviews is not progressing, then that review will move up to the chief department or their designee to review. These will all be things reflected in the ESH policy. We also take note of the fact that there were recommendations made about revising our ESH passport book and an FAQ to kind of better explain. So we're taking a look at that. There are already options in there about designating. It is hard to kind of make those documents individualized, but there are, through their assessment forms, checkboxes that are individualized. So finally, in terms of data collection, we take seriously, and I think I've been the first person up here to always say we have limitations on the electronic capabilities of collecting a lot of the information. We are doing better, particularly in terms of assessing ESH's effectiveness in lowering the violence in general population when those individuals were moved out of those general population housing areas after an incident and going into ESH. But we will be, and we are working on with the case management tool and other things going on, the long-term goal includes systems that electronically capture the relevant information. While we are trying to ensure some of that capturing now, a lot of it is still paper-based. A comprehensive movement and programming database will be hopefully something that we can get done, and I hate to put it out there, but I know that it sounds ridiculous, but these are years in the making to kind of get those systems up, and so we are working on that. So moving on specifically to young adult ESH, the recommendations, obviously, a lot of them were similar, so I won't go over some of those things in terms of just changes to the interdisciplinary team, some of the things that we want to put in the passbooks. I was made aware that our entry-level folks do not get the same type of notification in terms of a passport and other documentation, so we'll work on developing something tailored to the young adults for that. So they understand in terms of protocols for the entry unit and their progression out of entry unit, since that is not currently available to the adults. And just not to speak for H&H, but we are working closely with H&H, and they have been great partners in making sure that they can do the daily mental health rounds and working with us in terms of placement. They do provide us a review of people before placement for ESH, and that will continue, and we'll work with them to kind of better that relationship as best as we can to understand needs and concerns they may have, even if we are placing them in ESH. In terms of the overrepresentation, I think there is some concern, and I'll note it, that with 30-some% of the ESH population being represented by young adults, there are only about 10% of the population for the department that are young adults. So there is something that we need to do. Obviously, with the elimination of punitive segregation, there has been a lot more use of ESH for that young adult population, because that is, as we've seen for both secure and entry, kind of their first immediate placement, whereas for the adults, there are other options. So while we will continue to look at that, we have experimented with new programming like Cure Violence and other things to be placed for the people in ESH, and we'll continue to look at that, specifically for ESH. And Wynette may want to speak a little bit about kind of the efforts to program in ESH, but in general, those are some of the areas that we wanted to talk about, at least in a broad forum here, to give you an update. Again, I can only close by saying that ESH is, as a model, not something that is firm and fixed at this point. We know that we continue to have to modify it. We request the board's both understanding, patience, and willingness to kind of explore some of the tougher issues with us. We are dealing with some of the most violent. We end up many times in this forum talking about that small population. I wanted to put it in context because ultimately we do have 96% of our population that do not actually ever get involved in a use of force, an incident, or an assault on staff. So that kind of concentration of people gets to be very small, but we take the action to manage and house them differently because they do persistently, or their actions are so drastic or so violent that we need to make an immediate move and house them specifically with ESH or other things. So again, thank you very much for being open to that. I'm sure we will talk more, especially as we move into rulemaking. We look forward to that. And unless anyone wants to say anything, I'll open up to questions on those.
Thanks, Jeff. So in preparation for this meeting, we reviewed all of the recommendations, and there were lots of areas that we were aware of that you had made progress on, and even together or on your own, you have implemented some of those recommendations. One that you don't think you spoke to today was recreation, which was something that was a focus in the report, so I'm wondering what the department has done to better incentivize and create better access to recreation, as well as improving the recreation areas in ESH.
Sure. 3 different points. The first is obviously trying to work very hard on deconflicted master schedules so that there is consistency in the time slots that are available for recreation. 2, on the physical structure, we are working and have already in half of the recreation areas have been installed with dip bars and pull-up bars to enhance kind of large muscle mass kind of exercise. The rest of those pens will be done by the end of this week. And then third, we are still working on kind of incentivized ways of moving towards that. It is an individual kind of offering, and we'll do more to try to figure out what other programs we can put in the rec areas, but I don't have as much detail on the incentivized side of things right now.
Last month, Jeff, we passed as part of the variance request, a caveat or something on use of restraint desks in secure for education, and the department stated that it would carefully review situations, and if not necessary, you would not use restraint desks. Could you tell us if you did that and what were the results?
Yes, we did. We took it pretty seriously. We reviewed. There were very small instances where we did have to use a restraint desk to separate individuals, but for the most part, there are many days, I actually don't know the exact number of days, for which restraint desks were not necessary. The cohorts were already living together, or there were not enough conflict and security issues to kind of require the restraint desk. There were a couple instances where that did happen. We did place them, and there have been no incidents within those areas since we started.
Thank you.
I just want to talk a little bit about the restraint desks as well. As we all recall, when we were originally in enhanced supervision rulemaking, we did not consider the young adults, and the young adults are there by virtue of a variance right now. And one of the reasons we didn't consider them is because of the needs, developing brain, the fact that many have trauma, have experienced trauma. We are in the midst of rulemaking now. I'd be very, sorry, I've got some laryngitis. I'd be very interested in meeting with you all sooner rather than later. But experts are telling us that not only is it not best practices, but it's not even a good practice to restrain anyone, much less young people, 7 hours a day, 28 days to do some sort of assessment. In fact, the information we're getting from experts, because we're speaking to experts all over the country, correctional and psychiatric and psychological, is that this is much more likely to create much greater psychological harm and actually create them a likelihood that they'll become more violent when they are released from those restraints. So what are you all doing to assess the effectiveness of the way you're utilizing restraints and consider the appropriateness and best practices of how to use restraints, if in fact they're necessary? Because we've seen through what you've done in Secure, and I thank you very much for really lifting the use of those, you've been able to manage those young people to a great extent without them.
So a couple things, and I'll let Gwyneth speak. I think one, obviously, we specifically tried to change the criteria for secure from ESH so that we could, as I think we've stated, the goal of the department has been to minimize the use of restraint tests to focus on those who are most violent. So first of all, what we did was change the criteria for secure to ensure that those most violent were not insecure, so we would not have to use those security measures in secure. Focusing in on ESH, I think to your point, Judge, I think we agree that we need to take a longer look, and I'm sure that is a conversation we can have in more detail at a separate meeting. We have also consulted with other people in other jurisdictions who have used restraint tests and other psychiatrists as well, who have also provided us kind of varying assessments on things. People who are using effectively for 3 to 4 hours at a time and then with breaks, but they also go back to administrative SAG. I think we've been pretty honest about saying that because we don't provide that option, we don't then move them back into a punitive SEG situation. We have been trying to figure out how to best kind of figure out whether it's a programming issue, if there are other options, and I think as we have said, once we have more security and feel safer about the weapons and some of the things that we may get out of a passage of state law for the use of body scanners, that would allow us to also make different choices. So that doesn't answer all of your questions, certainly. We are doing more assessments and we're talking to people as well. We'd love to sit down with you and compare notes on who you're talking to and who we're talking to. Thank you.
I'm going to suggest we schedule a meeting with the
that'd be great.
department now that we've got our commissioner to engage you in rulemaking. Thank you.
Here, but give us your assessment. I'd like to see that the program.
Sure.
Not a raw data, you know.
Oh, sure.
Very, very concerned. The department now has a policy of encouraging criminal charges being placed against persons who commit criminal acts within the prisons. There have been a number of cases where we've noted that this appears to result in extended incarceration on Rikers Island, and additionally, ESH young adult, people come into ESH young adult for an instant act, but ESH adult, there's a look-back procedure. You took people who were in enhanced restraint, they hadn't done anything, you didn't show that they had a weapon, you knew they had a weapon, but you didn't find the weapon, and you place people in ESH, in restraint, ESH 1, without charge, without instant act. So I'm concerned about, ESH being a very punitive unit, and also I'm concerned, I would wonder if you could explain to us how the increased charging, whether those persons are ending up in ESH, or I know they're ending up in this hyper-secure unit that you've set up, like John Doe and 2B.
That's a judicial order, sir.
Well, I mean, he has multiple charges in addition to his instant
We don't
instant
control
charge.
the charges that are kind of placed upon them. We work with the Bronx DA, certainly when incidents, I mean, if there are assaults on officers or other assaults on inmates, those are just by policy chargeable offenses. The
Right,
DA
I was just
then
wondering, is
chooses
that,
to
is
move
that?
forward with them or not.
So I really had two questions. Is that process resulting in people who will be ending up in ESH or in extreme isolation? Well, is that causing them to spend a lot more time on Rikers Island rather than to go upstate if they're going to be convicted of their-
Again, I can't speak to only because it's a court processing standpoint. This is not something that, obviously, if people are convicted or arrested on other criminal charges, there's the possibility, but I don't actually know.
If it's possible for the department to look at that, I would appreciate knowing what the consequences are in terms of the use of punitive segregation, extreme isolation, and ESH for people who are being charged with crimes on
Well, I
Rikers
think
Island
that's-
due to this new policy that you have.
I just want to be very clear that there is no causality.
Well,
You're
but
asking to
this-
see if this causes more criminal charges?
No, I want to see how long
Oh.
how long they're staying on Rikers Island.
People who are in PSEG and who are in,
People who are being
ESH.
charged while they're on Rikers Island, is that extending substantially the amount of time they spend on Rikers Island. So when someone is charged with murder, they have a case, it goes quickly or slowly through the
Yeah, we'll take a
process.
look.
And
It'll
then they're
be-
charged with an assault
We-
on
we can
Rikers
take a
Island. Is
look.
that
It'll be-
resulting in an increased length of time on Rikers Island?
We can take a look. It'll be a little it'll be very individual based because it'll be hard just based on the charges and what type of this. We'll figure out what we can or can't do.
I'd appreciate it.
Jeff, thank you for your report. Could you talk a little bit about the movement through the ESH levels? That was something that was identified, that sort of, the way people got out of ESH
Yeah.
is by getting release from the department. Have we made any progress on the movement through the various levels?
So we have definitely had movement through the multiple levels. I think as the report directly kind of states, particularly with lengths of stay for some of the people who are in these units, many more people leave because they are discharged than they actually move level to level. At the same time, we do have movement from level to level. I don't have the exact numbers on me right now, and I can get that for you. I think actually it's been pretty well documented inside the report, but we're certainly trying to encourage that by changing up a bit of the review process. As we said, we're adding programming staff, dedicated programming staff to that. We're constituting a larger multidisciplinary team to look at it, and also for people who we don't follow the same path. Once we get to, say, 90 days, then the appeal process and the review kicks up, because there may be a concern about, just one person's point of view or one group's point of view versus an outside eye. So we'll try to do that, and then we'll assess how that happens. It'll probably take 90 days to 120 days to make that assessment on what changes happen, but we'll get that.
I have another question. What's the plan in terms of the 18-year-olds? I know right now, because of the consent judgment and also the department's preference to keep the 18s not mixed with over 21. And I understand you only have, the assessment unit and the level 1 young adult unit. But what's the plan for them in terms of being able to go through this progression?
So this is something I've been honest with the board about when we were talking about sort of the same issue. We are taking a look at trying to figure out whether or not we can create more young adult-focused ESH housing that would allow for a progression for the 18. We do have to face SCOC kind of approval and construction, which are slower than normal these days. So we're certainly planning on, we've identified spaces where we would take a look at that, and we're submitting plans, but those are out of our hands.
Ms. Saunders, do you care to add anything to this, or?
No, thank you. I think that Jeff covered it all. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks very much. Any other comments from the board? We'll move on to the next topic. Thanks very much. This has to do with satellite intake and the closed housing area plans. Martha is going to provide some background here.
So over the past several months, board monitoring staff have reported the repeated DOC practice of keeping people inappropriately housed in closed housing areas. BOC staff have encountered 7 such units in recent months. BOC monitoring staff have successfully intervened to have people moved out to appropriate housing and to ameliorate immediate safety concerns. As board staff have identified people in closed housing areas, we have reported these issues to the respective facilities, the chief of department, and the commissioner's office. The board has serious concerns about the department's repeated use of closed housing areas, which have been described alternatively and inconsistently by DOC staff as satellite intakes, 9-to-5 houses, mini or alternative intakes, and intelligence gathering areas. People are effectively hidden when housed in these units. The units appear closed on the daily census. The official inmate information and management system does not list the people in their real location. The floor cards that should always accompany the person in custody detailing health and security flags are often not with them in the closed units. The units have been found to violate the minimum standards as people are locked in and not afforded showers, visits, recreation, religious services, law library, or linen exchange, among other services as required by the standards. In many instances, the conditions of the units, quite simply, are unacceptable, littered with trash, filthy, and flooded. Staff conditions are not safe, as staff working in the units are often not given basic information about the reason or nature of the unit, and they lack basic information about the people they're charged with watching in these units. Further, health staff are not aware of the location of their patients in these units, creating a dangerous barrier to medication and care. As I mentioned, we've talked to the department about this, and it's now time for a public discussion about the department's plans to prevent this practice from continuing. So, thank you.
Good morning, Deputy Commissioner Farrell, DOC. First, let me just start to say there's a difference between a satellite intake and open and closed housing. What we do is, for open and closed housing units, we understand there's been concerns where facilities were housing inmates in units that were officially designated as closed. We have a multitude of reasons of why a unit may be closed. It could be for maintenance issues, fire safety upgrades, or just census consolidation. My unit oversees the tracking of all housing within the agency. We do that on a form that we refer to as the BUPS, the Bed Utilization Plan. It's forwarded out on a distribution list to hundreds of people throughout the agency. The process is, when a housing unit is closed, whether we do it or whether the facility does it through consolidation purposes, it's recorded to us and we take it offline. The process is, when they need to use that housing unit again, and if it is deemed usable through maintenance and other types of environmental and sanitary concerns, they contact us and we officially put it back online. We understand there are times where that is not happening. What we've done is we've established a series of monitoring measures to ensure a housing unit, if it is offline, is not used to permanently house inmates. We're doing that in a way that through the assistant chiefs, the division chiefs' offices, their staff are out daily comparing that BUPS list of every housing unit that is closed and visually walking those housing units to ensure that no inmates are being housed there. The facilities are required to do this as well on a daily basis. And as a stopgap measure, we are doing random monitoring through the Genetech to ensure that there are no inmates residing in these housing units. That is reported to the chief of department's office, who then formulates a master report for the agency and retains that on file. We're going to continue that. We have procedures in place. We have a teletype that went out as an interim to all the staff to make it as clear as possible that this is what is to be expected and how we're going to operate. We're in the process of revising the operations order that will address that. It's a rather lengthy operation order, so it's going to take a little while to get that revised to the manner which it should be revised to. So we drafted this teletype order so we can get that direction out to all the staff as quickly as possible. Right now, we have not had any recent situations that have been brought to our attention or we have identified as closed housing being used to house inmates. Now, as far as satellite intakes go, there's a difference. Satellite intakes were formulated to find a location within each correctional facility that we can use to temporarily hold an inmate post-incident, post-housing unit transfer, assess an individual if there's some separation issues they came across. Basically, anything that would require a housing unit transfer. We did this because we wanted to avoid clogging up our main intake. Our main intakes are one of the most busiest points within our facilities, and we felt that we wanted to have a location, each facility have a location, that we can manage those inmates rather than introduce them to the intake and thereby potentially create additional tensions within an already busy environment. So these satellite intakes are normally housing units that are closed housing units. They were once permanent housing units, but for census reasons, we can take them offline. They're taken offline, and they're used to just hold the inmate for up to 3 hours based on tour commander approval, up to no more a maximum of 6 hours with the warden's approval. The policy, I understand an operations order went out. It has since been pulled. It is going through the revision process. Direction has been put out to staff that that order will be very clear that 6 hours is the limit an individual will remain in this housing, in this area. It's not a housing unit. We have also established a logbook to track it, and it collects the information from where the inmate came from, the time the inmate came into the area, the reason that the inmate was placed in that area, who placed them, the supervisor approving it, where they're going, where they're being transferred to, and the time they leave. Medical is contacted directly by the tour commander for any individual that's placed in this area. So therefore, if there are needs or medical follow-up, or there's current medication regime that the inmate is entitled to get during that time frame, medical will know where that individual is. So that also is being monitored on a regular basis. The tour commander, the deputy wardens of the facility are required to tour those areas each day, ensuring, verifying through the logbook that all those elements are achieved. What also is done is, again, the assistant chief's office, through their tours of the open and closed, or the closed housing unit inspection, includes those satellite intakes as part of their tour, as well as a additional monitoring tool. And these intakes are not used on a everyday basis. They're an as needed. So there may be no inmates in these areas for days at a time. But if an incident takes place, or if there's some other need that would require it, they're opened, information is recorded in the logbook, maintained, and emptied when the inmate is assigned to a permanent housing unit.
I know that a few other people want to speak. You may not have the answer to this right now. I'm very pleased that everyone is taking this very seriously. What I haven't heard is an understanding of why this may be occurring. And I think the accountability mechanisms are very important, and I think that will be helpful in preventing this from happening. But I also think that there needs to be some analysis and support for facilities, whatever's generating this need, that somehow relates to delays and people being rehoused. And I think those are the underlying issues that also need to be reviewed, and we need to have an understanding of why this was occurring. And I also think that in tandem with this, which is something I think you are thinking about, is that in addition to the accountability mechanisms on these whatever alternative intakes, sanctioned or not sanctioned, there needs to be more support and accountability for the intakes, the real intakes themselves, because these two areas are related, and I think some of the underlying issues are related.
Is to be, not what is right now. Certainly the order that Chief Jennings issued in September defining these satellite units, or interrogation units as you also call them, and have called them in the past, allowed for someone to be there for up to 24 hours and more. And it's also the case that it's traditional within the department for people to spend long periods of time in the receiving, not just 3 hours or 6 hours when they're from one facility, when they're removed from one area to another. I understand the complexity of the problem that you have when someone is being taken out. But a month or two ago, when I went to Manhattan House and saw a group of people who were housed in effectively solitary confinement, they didn't have access. They had an hour a day out of cell. They were a combination of what you considered to be, without any due process, protective custody and punitive segregation. This is what these units, this was not something for 3 hours or 6 hours. It's just a unit you set up that the medical staff didn't know about, and the mental health staff didn't know about. So appears to be something that the department in multiple facilities feels is what they should be doing. I appreciate the teletype that just went out to say no. I was disturbed by the teletype that, by the order that Chief Jennings issued in September describing these units. Last week or the week before, I was in AMKC, and I spoke to the officers who had been in that unit, one of those satellite interrogation units. And I asked her why, I asked her if anybody had been in the unit in the past week. She said no. And I said, why was it set up in the first place? They said, well, it makes it easier for intake. And I understand that, and why didn't you need it now? Because we haven't needed it. I think it is an error, although I do defer to your expertise in this one, but it looks to me, having seen receiving rooms, for a long time, that you should work on improving the efficiency of the receiving room rather than setting up new satellite interrogation or detention units, which are likely to keep people without services for long periods of time, absent access to medical and mental health care, recreation, visits, etc. That is what will happen with these units. It is what happens with these units. And it is not a good idea for you to set these up. I was particularly struck by discussions by the department that you needed to have, as you said now, you need to have Genentech checking to see whether any of the things are setting up, and the commissioner's office is going to delegate people to wander around the jails to see if anybody is violating the order, which has not been found by Genentech. I mean, that suggests to me that there is a underlying notion within the department that we really need to have these secret intelligence satellite units, and it's going to be a problem for you to prevent them from operating. I would urge the department not to create a new kind of housing without due process, which is likely to deny people access to the basic rights to which they're entitled by the Board of Corrections standards. These units operate outside of the standard.
They're not housing units. They're satellite intakes. We use every tool we can to ensure compliance. The operations order you're speaking to from September, that was the operation order I spoke of that was pulled and is being revised. So we do not have the perpetuity of someone being there, and we invoked the strict 6-hour limit. So no inmates are being housed in those areas. They are used simply as a waypoint so we can properly assess individual or individuals post-incident, so we can come up with the most appropriate housing unit for those individuals on a permanent basis. We do this because we wanted to have it in a smaller, less chaotic, if you will, area than the main intake, where we're dealing with hundreds of courts, new admissions, transfers, and this is the area we chose to do it, and this is the way we want to do it. We feel it's a better way to manage this population. It's a better way to efficiently assess where the best housing unit is for these individuals, and we believe it to be a safer environment. They're not interrogation centers. They are simply waypoints to hold an inmate prior to a permanent housing unit.
When
They're
would
not
you?
secret.
Sorry,
They're
when do
listed
you?
on my BUPS.
When would you estimate that the new plan will be put in place?
All the direction has already been issued. Everything is in place as I speak.
It is already in place.
Yes.
On satellite intakes?
Satellite intakes. On the BUPS, it's listed, the housing unit, it'll show as SI. Martha, I believe I've added you to the distribution list for that BUPS, so you can have it.
Thank you.
So the satellite housing, the satellite
Satellite intakes.
intake is for when an incident happens, you need to separate the people and decide where the person goes for housing?
For the most part, yes.
And they're not going to, they're adults, they're not going to go to punitive seg, or they are awaiting their adjudication on that issue?
If they're an incident and they are adults, and it's an incident that would result in a pre-hearing detention status, they may be there until that That cell is made available in GRVC to accommodate that inmate, and they will be held there pending the transfer to the facility. But what would happen is they would be detained there, and then once the transfer in the cell became available, they would be escorted and they would be processed out of the facility through the main intake like we do with every transfer that goes in and out of the facility.
Right.
It's just kind of a waypoint within the facility, rather than have someone who is emotionally upset, potentially still violent, acting out in an intake, kind of contaminating the other inmates in the intake, creating a more volatile situation. This person, it's an area where we feel we could better manage that particular individual.
Will they have beds? Will they have water? Will they be fed? Will they have access to recreation?
If they're there during the feeding, yes, they will be fed. There are no mattresses because it's not a housing unit, and they're only going to be there for up to 6 hours. And there will be water, there will be toilets, there will be everything else that someone is afforded while in an intake holding pen.
And visits?
Probably not, because they're there being assessed and awaiting a permanent housing unit. And it's usually a post-incident type of situation. I suppose that would have to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. I'm sure if there's a legal visit or something that came across, definitely accommodate that. But again, that would be a case-by-case because it's only they're only there for a short period of time.
I've come across these things a numbers of times over the years, including quite recently, and I received the order because our staff were very concerned about the September order. And when we have found these units, they were not places where people were kept for short periods of time. So you agree that those things existed, but you're proposing something different? Because those were also called satellite intake units and interrogation units.
What's happened is we need to do a better job, and we're in the process of doing a better job with internal communications with our staff in what the definition is and the terminology. What I believe you're maybe confusing is the open and closed housing unit aspect, which we dealt with in a different light, and the designation and use of satellite intakes. If it's a closed housing unit, there will be no one in that area. And that's the direction, and those are the safeguards we put in place. If the area has been designated as a satellite intake, and it reflects that officially on the department's beds utilization plan, that will be recorded as an SI. So it's open on an as-needed basis. If the housing unit is closed, it will not house an inmate. And that's what we're doing. We are putting into place a series of monitoring and just monitoring from different levels to ensure compliance. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We want to make sure things are done properly. Everyone is afforded their appropriate level of standards and not use housing units that we officially list as closed.
I just want to return back to the issue that I had raised and maybe phrase it as a question, because I do think the accountability mechanisms make sense. But what is it that you're doing behind the scenes to deal with the underlying challenges and delays in reassessing, rehousing people?
Is this post-incident or transfer? I'm just trying to get a better understanding of where you're going.
Both.
Post-incident, by using the satellite intakes and having those areas where staff, the supervisor can go, talk to the inmate, find out exactly what happened, we feel as though that's going to expedite the permanent housing unit for the inmate, okay? Because it's done in a much more controlled manner. Less inmates, less activity, less distractions. So we feel as though we'd be able to make a quicker permanent housing unit decision for those individuals. As far as long-term transfers to other facilities where issues come out, those unfortunately are done on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes there are more challenging situations in moving an inmate from one facility to the other, either from prior incidents, prior involvements, or other types of separation issues that may come into play, or the various categories that a person may fall into. and those can sometimes delay the process. But we try and get people transferred, processed, and into a permanent housing unit as fast as possible, because by delaying it only adds to the transportation issues, the intake activities, and the anxiety on the inmate being bounced around between the facilities and on a bus, off a bus. We don't want that either. And it also adds to the anxiety and stress of our staff, because during those situations, as the frustration levels increase, the potential for incidents may increase as well. So we want to do that from a safety standpoint from our staff as well as the inmate, because we want to create a system that just improves the process. And we're dealing with the people business. It's sometimes we deal with the unknowns, and we just have to come up with the best approaches to deal with it.
Just another question. Will these satellite intakes, will they all have cameras?
They're all camered up.
They're all cameraed up. And not to get into operations, but where do you get the officer that?
We would have to pull an officer from another position, reduce them from another post, and assign them to that housing unit. The officer will be there permanently while that unit is open. So if an inmate is there, there will be an officer on post, just like if it was a housing unit. But again, it is not a housing unit. But someone is there, and they will make 15-minute visual observations of the inmate to ensure safety. And the supervisor is also required to tour that area while the inmate's there as well.
I just want to really actually thank you for engaging this issue. I understand that it's complex. I understand this thing wouldn't be happening if there were not a felt need at the level of the facility. What we've seen doesn't look good, and probably is not good, and I think you're trying to cope with this. I'm concerned about the efficiencies in terms of Stanley's questions, because you're already often short in terms of facilities, but I appreciate the seriousness regarding these closed units. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is a public comment. We have two people who are going to comment. You will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and there's an iPad on the stage to tell you how much time you have left. And again, if you would please adhere to the time frame, and we'll be happy to accept any written statements that you might have. Al Craig.
Good morning. First, I'd like to congratulate the Commissioner. I hope that civility works out better for you than it has for us as a union. Listen, last month, we stood here, we heard former commissioners stand up here and talk about racetracks and how Rikers Island could be developed. And we heard Ms. King say, oh, what we can do to help you. I've stood up here for a year and a half or more and talked about one issue, safety. I've never heard you say anything we can do to help. Not one time have you stood here and said that. As a matter of fact, nobody on this board has ever said, what can we do to help you? Here's a guy talking about some futuristic plan, and he says, what will you say, what can we do to help you? Well, this is the thing that bothers me. I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said, to educate a man's mind and not his morals makes him a menace. Mr. Cohen, you're looking like a menace. You've sat here and defended not the victims consistently, but the perpetrator of victims. Last month, if I may revisit that as well, you talked about John Doe. Our president stood here and said he's hurt more than 40 people, officers and inmates. And you're more concerned with his rights than the rights of the people that have hurt him. Sir, that is a menace. You're highly educated but sorely misunderstood by anybody that's worked in correction. And people say, well, why are you getting up here saying this to this poor man? People are getting hurt. Have you ever seen John Doe in action? rip a guy's face open with a razor, and you keep bringing him up as if he's the victim. You think these people want to keep coming up here every week and, I mean, you guys have the patience of Job. I couldn't take it. I mean, if I was a commissioner, I'd say, take me to court. Because this is ridiculous. You cannot continually defend somebody, the worst of us. The worst of us should not have more rights than the best of us. It just can't continue to happen this way. You have a moral obligation to do something. And I've stood here month after month for over a year now and pleaded and begged you. I've even begged you to do something about safety, and you won't even talk to me. We actually had to take you to court to even have a conversation, and you still won't talk. So to hear a guy get up here, a hustler, gets up here and says how we can turn Rikers Island into someplace nice, and you go, well, we can help you with that. And then I'm saying, you're charged with doing something. You have a moral responsibility. So, Nia, I'm sorry, I'm not that much of a civil person when people are getting hurt. And I know political correctness has its place, but it's not now. Do something now. Let's stop talking about 10 years from now. Do something now. You have a moral obligation. Please do something. Do something. Learn something more than what somebody tell you. You're not an advocacy group. You're an oversight. Show some oversight. Thank you very much.
The next and final speaker is Grace Price.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to go at the end, as usual. I want to make sure I'm heard because I've noticed that my audio never shows up on the video. So I'm going to lean in. I want to make sure that my words are heard loud and clear today. Sorry I wasn't here earlier to give public comment on your vote. I had to be in federal court this morning. As you know, I've been fighting a series of very long battles to restore myself to the status I enjoyed before my malicious prosecution and unlawful imprisonment. I'm winning. I'm very happy. This week, I'm elated. Cyrus Vance has been blowing in the wind, and I finally have a notion that justice does come to those of us who have been tortured by the criminal justice system. So I am heartened to know that eventually my enemies who drag their feet on progress will be blowing in the wind along with the district attorney. Commissioner, I hope you're not one of those people. I really hope that you engage with me and the Jails Action Coalition and all the people working to prevent the sexual violence on Rikers. We've been shut out from your plans. I've heard you on numerous occasions stand up here and say that you are working to implement the PREA provisions laid out by the board and by the federal government, and I'm stymied by these comments. Why are you working to implement two totally different acts? Why aren't you just working to implement the BOC? I don't understand that. I also don't understand why there weren't variance requests entered on 70-some other deadlines that have been missed by the Board of Corrections. They only asked you for 4 different variances on 4 different specific provisions of the rule that you voted on last November, but there are at least 60 or 70 other deadlines that have been completely ignored, and we don't have any renewed expectation of when those deadlines will be met. These are not light deadlines either. We don't know, for instance, if the pilot camera program was implemented. That deadline for that pilot program to implement cameras in DOC buses was in July, but we don't know, not renewed deadline. We don't know any of these things. I also, I want to specifically address this need to create this digital database for screening. I just heard the chief of Rikers investigation stand up here and say that they only need 6 hours to screen people in these satellite housing units. They're clearly not doing that with an electronic tool currently, correct? So why do we need all this extra time to build a new electronic tool? What is exactly happening in these satellite housing units for assessment that can't be done with a PREA implementation tool? I'm really having a hard time understanding the department's rationale for needing, all of a sudden, throwing this notion at us that they need this electronic database. You heard Mick Kincaid say that since 2015, he's been advocating for such a thing. I also want to say that it's BS that it's going to take 6 months to implement a new digital screening tool. When I worked for Bill Gates and when I worked for JP Morgan, I was the chief project manager on implementing new technologies. I was a young, bright wunderkid. And let me tell you something. When JP Morgan told me that I had to move all internal processes for HR and payroll out of New York to Delaware by the end of 2001, and that was in June.
Ms. Price, your time has run out, please.
Thank you, but I'm going to just take 30 more seconds. Thank you, Mr. Cephas. I accomplished those deadlines, not in the 6 or 8 months given to me, but I did it in 2 months because they moved the deadlines up. So exactly what is the department going to do in 6 months when they still haven't figured out how to implement their new screening tool because they haven't done the proper Q&A, they haven't done the proper bug analysis, and they haven't tested in an off-site environment their new screening tool? What's going to happen in 6 months? Are they going to stand up here and give that again as an excuse for why they haven't implemented some 70 or 80 different deadlines? What exactly is the plan here? What's the direction? Last week, the Downstate Coalition to End Sexual Violence had a meeting with Darcel Clark, and we specifically went over these ineptitudes. There, as we mentioned before, there is momentum gathering to make change in Albany. And if that's what we need to do to end the rape crisis on Rikers, that is what we will do. But we very much hope that we will have more communication and better respect for the deadlines that the department has been set down. Sorry. We want the BOC deadlines to be revised. I've been asking now for 3 months for that chart that I provided to be revised with those deadlines. Let's see some leadership there. Honestly, people don't come to these meetings anymore because we're tired of being ignored and having nothing happen.
Thank you. Sorry, that concludes the meeting. No further comments. The next board meeting is scheduled for November 14th, 2017 at 9 o'clock in this location. Thank you very much.
Thank you.